Good day, folks, and welcome to Horsemanship 101 again today. Unfortunately, I've been wanting to do this video for a while, but unfortunately I don't have a cameraman, so it makes it a lot harder to do. And actually, my wind filter fell off my camera today, so we might even get wind noise. It's kind of a bit terrible, but we're going to do the best we can, and I'm going to do the best I can to explain what I'm talking about. And before we even get started with the mounting, which is what I want to talk about today, I want to talk about something that's really important to prior to mounting is making sure your cinch is done up properly. And talking about how to do it up properly is there's several different ways of tying it. Now, I'm not going to go into that, but what I am going to talk about is if you don't want your horse to become cinchy, I'm big on preventing problems, okay? When you tighten it up, pull it up nice and slow, nice and steady, nice and easy. You know, don't grab the thing and give it a freaking yank, you know, because this horse has gotten really good, but she'll still jump a little if I jerk it too fast. So smooth is always good, prevents a horse from becoming cinchy. That's a common problem with horses, and it's mostly the result of the people doing up the cinch. They don't do it up properly. They don't do it nice and smoothly. You can do it tight, but still do it smoothly, and it makes it a lot nicer for the horse. The horse won't jump. This is actually quite tight right now, but I'm going to actually loosen it off a bit because I want to talk about something that is really important too. There's a couple of problems when it comes to saddling, or not saddling, mounting a horse, that huge issues. Now, one of the things you got to worry about is the torque on the saddle, how much the saddle twists to the side when you're getting on. Very important factor. Now, in a perfect world, well, there would be none. However, best case scenario, use a mounting block. Get yourself elevated so that you put very little weight in that stirrup at all. And in fact, if your horse is really well trained to stand still while mounting, you don't even have to use that stirrup. You can actually, if your mounting block's high enough, you can actually leg over onto the, get in the saddle without using either of the stirrups, putting no strain on the horse whatsoever. Now, there's something that is really bad. Over-tightening a cinch can be very uncomfortable for a horse. The only thing that is worse than over-tightening a cinch is actually having it too loose. Because when you get on the horse, what happens is the saddle twists as soon as you put weight into that stirrup. And what ends up happening here, and I'm going to try and describe it here as best I can, you see that side part there? It's on the withers. And that's what happens if the saddle isn't tight enough, if it shifts. Now, depending on your horse and the withers it has and the saddle fit and everything else, I mean, there's a lot of variables. This is a quarter horse, so she's got very low withers, wide back. Very hard to get a saddle steady on her. You actually have to tighten it up really good to keep it from moving. Now, like I said, if you look at the way the saddle is designed, the gullet's quite high. There's not meant to be any weight. See, my hand goes right in there. There's no weight at all on her withers. Now, if that saddle turns at all, it's going to put pressure on there, and that's a spot that is not meant to have any pressure on it, and it can be actually quite painful for the horse. So the only thing that's actually more painful than a cinch that's too tight is one that's too loose. Because when it's too loose and you go to mount, the saddle's going to twist. And that can end up causing all kinds of problems, aside from the fact you're hurting your horse. You're going to end up with a horse that no longer wants to be mounted. And the next time you try getting on, because it thinks you're going to hurt it when you do it, the next time you try getting on, it might walk off on you. And that's another one of the causes of walking off, which is, I talked about that in a previous video, how to fix that. That's another way of preventing it, is making sure your saddle's actually tight enough. Now, there's a couple of ways. Mounting is important in many ways, how you do it. I'm not as athletic as some people, so I can't just jump up without actually even using my stirrup. I've seen guys that actually can do that. Same people that can actually mount bareback without a problem. This horse I actually can get on bareback, but that's only because she's short. Another factor to consider, don't get a horse that's bigger than you really need, because you start getting into 16, 17, 18 hand high horses, there's absolutely no way that you can get on without yanking on that saddle. It's really, really hard. Even with this one, she's only 13 half hands. I don't use a mounting block because in the real world out on the trail, well, they just aren't everywhere. If you're riding in an arena, by all means use one, because that's a kind of an environment where you can always take the horse back to the mounting block to get back on, and that's good, because that is the absolute best possible scenario, is if you actually have, you know, a mounting block, steps that are fairly high, preferably high enough that you can actually get a leg over the horse without even using the stirrup. And that's the best case scenario, because otherwise, the next best thing you can do is, you know, make sure your horse isn't bigger than you need. And what I do with this one is I'll put my foot in there, but I'm going to do a couple of bounces before I get on. And what I'm actually going to end up doing here, I'm going to tighten this up a bit more because I know it's not tight enough right now. I can tell by how much slack I got. Maybe she's gotten fat on me in the last couple of days. I don't know. What I would do is, there's a couple of different ways of doing this now. Using your foot that's on the ground, bounce as much as you can, kind of spring up, and lean across the saddle. So you're basically, even if you didn't have your foot on the other side, which I'm actually taking out right now, I'm laying across my horse, I'm balanced in the middle. Now I'm going to jump back now. Okay. Now, the idea of that is, by doing that, I'm keeping my weight centered on the horse. I'm not going to pull the saddle one way or the other. And as I throw my leg over, I bring my body up into a vertical position, and I keep my weight as centered as possible on the horse at all times, so that I'm not pulling the saddle one way or the other. It's really important, because I don't want to be causing her discomfort. I don't want me getting on her to ever be a bad thing. And it's really important doing it right. And, you know, so that's what I want to talk about, is doing it right. Preventing problems, because, you know, as you can see, she's being pretty good here. She was grazing. She's actually paying attention now because she's expecting me to get on, because I jumped up once. Now, the other thing is, if you can actually spring up from the ground and lay across your saddle without even using a stirrup, great. If not, if you have to use your saddle or stirrup, use as little weight on there as possible. You know, don't rely on, you know, pulling your entire body weight up by the saddle, because that's going to put a lot of torque on it. That's going to cause a lot of discomfort for the horse. Spring up as much as you can. Bounce up as much as you can. Use your leg that's on the ground to bounce up and get over as quickly as possible. Get your weight over the close, you know, so you're centered on over the horse before you even get your leg thrown over. Once you get your leg over, straighten up. Keep your weight centered as much as you can during the whole process, so that there's very little torque on the saddle. That's what you want to try and avoid. One of the other things that I was actually learned from one guy, and it may or may not work for you, because of depending on how you've trained your horse. I've had problems with it, because one of the things that a lot of guys say is, instead of grabbing the horn, never grab the horn. Actually put your hand across and on the off side of the neck, and use that to pull yourself up. You know, your hand nice, open, flat, not grabbing the mane or anything, just, you know, a flat hand on the back, on the opposite side of the neck, and use that to pull yourself up. And it is quite effective and works well. It reduces the amount of torque on the saddle. Unfortunately, some horses, I had one that I was having a bit of a problem with. I couldn't figure out, she kept moving every time I tried getting on. I was actually cueing her. By touching her on the neck, I was actually telling her to move. And even this one here, occasionally, I got to be careful. Touching her on there will cue her to do a side pass towards me from the ground, because of the groundwork I've taught her. So it doesn't work with every horse. It may cause a problem. It may actually make your horse want to move. But if you can, instead of grabbing the horn, put your hand on the neck, takes the torque off the saddle, and if your hand is spread out, you spread the weight out on the neck, it's not going to cause the horse a lot of discomfort pulling yourself up that way. It's actually pretty effective. So, you know, my way of mounting might not be the best way. It certainly isn't the only way. The only thing I know for sure is that there's lots of wrong ways to do things, and the one thing that you really truly want to minimize is the amount of torque on the saddle, no matter what method you use for getting on your horse. Always be conscious of how much torque you're putting on the saddle. I know some people that actually get horses that are too big for them and have no choice but use a mounting block to even be able to get on. If they're out in the trail and they dismount, they actually have to get somebody else to give them a leg up to get up on their horse again. And I've had that experience myself where I've been riding, I've had to actually get off my horse to help somebody else on theirs. And think about that. A lot of people think that they absolutely have to have a horse a certain size and height and everything else to, for whatever reason. And a lot of times they mistakenly get a horse that's far too big for them, and actually they end up hurting the horse because it's really hard for them to mount a horse that's far bigger than it needs to be. So just something to think about. Okay, always be conscious. Mounting is important. The way you do it can make a difference between whether or not you're going to have a problem in the future getting on your horse, whether or not it wants to let you get on, and whether or not you care enough about your horse to not cause a pain when you're doing it. So there you go, folks. Mounting, that's the best I can do right now. And I've had a cameraman, and if you were here in person, I could probably do a lot better job, but do what we do with what we got. And I hope it helps you. If you care about your equine friend, remember, mounting is a very important thing. A lot of people don't even give it much consideration. It's just one of those things. It's all we got to worry about is getting on the dang horse without realizing the physics of what's taking place when we do it. Like I said, if you got a mounting block, that's the best choice. Out in the real world, out in the trail, mounting blocks just don't exist. So, maybe opt for a horse that's a little more your size. And that's the best I can suggest. Have a good day, folks, and take care.